Good Sunday, everybody. Welcome to the Gavin, Seim show. We did pre-show. We're now here in main show. If you're watching this, welcome. If you missed pre-show because it's no longer part of this video, hit that bell icon and make sure you're notified when we go live, because in the pre-show is when we get crazy. But we're going to get a little crazy today because I want to talk about, I've been watching the news, right? I see the news. You know, I watch the news and all this stuff coming through, whether it's police abuse or government abuse or protesting or world politics. And I'll be sitting there thinking, okay, how much do I have to do today? How much does my little YouTube channel that doesn't actually pay me hardly anything? What do I have to do to pay bills this week? And should I do a video on this week? Sometimes I'm like looking at cosplayers like the Royals and stuff like that, and you know, all their being in the news. And I'm like, maybe we should do a video talking about the world's biggest cosplayers and how much they get paid for that. But I don't have time for everything. But you know that I'm very passionate about human rights, about right to travel, about right to defend yourself, about right to stand up, about constitutions. But I'm not an adorer of constitutions. I study constitutions, so I have a clean, simple argument to not only make a legal discussion, but also for the ignorant enforcers on the streets and to have a codified law to reference. But as I've always told you, and I will tell you a lot more, if you go to the Constitution School and the civil rights side of this channel, in the channel homepage, there's lots of videos talking about this. Your rights don't come from any constitution. And anytime a law or a constitution violates human rights, it isn't law at all. It's just criminal. So thank you all for jumping in. Thank you to those who jumped into our live stream. YouTube turns, thanks for the super chat. And let's talk about this Martha's Vineyard thing, because I saw this, and if you're a lot of the world, you're like, what the heck is Martha's Vineyard? And if you're the rest of the world, you're like, oh, well, immigrants and the right, and they're evil, and Biden. And if you're on the other side, you're like, Biden and evil and immigrants, invasion, and socialism. So most of the United States falls into these two camps of either here, and thank you Hexproof for the super chat, I appreciate it. So most fall into these two camps. Let me show you. Here's one. You have the Fox News camp, and so they're helping to blast Martha's Vineyard for leftist hypocrisy, and the MSN camp, where Ron DeSantis is being investigated by civil rights groups for using immigrants as props in a political charade. And then you have my camp. And my camp is super tiny. Okay, if half of this screen is right camp and half of this screen is left camp, my camp is that tiny little dirty spot right there. Right there. You see it? You don't see it. That's right. It's not visible and no one's listening. And that's life when you stand up for liberty. However, and I appreciate all I'm going to be watching your comments and also try and stay on track here. And thank you all. So I'm looking and I'm getting on Google and on maps and I'm like, okay, so let's see where this Martha's Vineyard is. So right, it's this wealthy tourist island down below Boston. And so you already know where this is going, right? If you've traveled, if you've been to Boston like I have, where they're literally just kind of like, Boston, Massachusetts, we're the heart of America. That's not a good Boston accent. I recognize that, but I can yodel. So there's that. And you people in Boston probably can't. No, I'm not going to do a good yodel because it's not what this show is about. So as you look at this, right, you can see, okay, this Martha's Vineyard, you don't have to think too deep to realize this is like a vacation expensive spot. I mean, we're talking about hotels that are $400 a night, and this is where you go for a weekend getaway or to have some little cutesy, authentic ice cream shop or something like that, right? So what's happening, just in case you missed it, what's happening is this governor of Florida, who's mad about illegal immigrants, is apparently shipping these immigrants coming from Venezuela, which is struggling a lot right now, and people are trying to get out of Venezuela, going to Colombia oftentimes, going to Mexico, going to Guatemala. It's important to understand that not all the Venezuelans are trying to get to the U.S. I know Venezuelans that escaped Venezuela and got to Colombia. I met them, some of them when I was there, and they were cool people working hard. So this universal idea that everyone in Latin America wants to get to the U.S. is not even remotely true, because most of Latin America knows that it's not actually better there. So the Freedom Club over here is happy because, to make a point, I guess, the politicians are taking poor immigrants trying to find a better life and putting them on planes and shipping them around. But the left is mad because they're using these people to make their political statements. And so the problem is, here's me, this little speck over here, right? And the few of us that understand this is simply two political camps keeping us at each other's throats, two political camps that are actually the same corrupt government, all rubbing each other off under the table. But above the table, they're all fighting with each other and saying what terrible people they are and faking crying and all this political stunts, up to the point where they're now taking actual human beings and shipping them to places and telling them, apparently, they're sending people into shelters to sell these immigrants, hey, we're going to take you somewhere and it's going to be better and we guarantee you a job, etc. And then you get to a place like Martha's Vineyard and there's not. That doesn't appear. And there's, of course, people that support them there, and there's other people there that are like, we don't want immigrants on our little island, and we want them to leave because they're trying to preserve their little paradise. So the idea is that the conservative governor who's trying to fight against illegal immigration is using the immigrants to make a point to a liberal enclave tourist area and show their hypocrisy. And in the end, what it really does is shows the hypocrisy of both. Ron DeSantis is an asshole. And so is Joe Biden. And so was George Bush. And so was Obama. But more importantly than whether you think they're an asshole, they're violating the law. And this is what I wanted to point out today. And I'm sure it will offend a little bit, because I wanted to touch with you on this mindset of like, send the immigrants home, send them to Puerto Rico, send them back to their country. And my mind is just hurting when I hear you guys say this. Because when someone says, I support freedom, I support liberty, and then they're like, put the wall up, finish the wall, send them back, they have to come here legally. And my mind is blown at the level of ignorance, not only ignorance of our Constitution and our laws, but just a personal ignorance of caring about others and loving your neighbor. And this is what I want to come to here. What you really have with Martha's Vineyard is two political factions. They're news elements, they're puppets, they're fan clubs, whether you're on the left or on the right, or you're me, the little speck who doesn't fit in over here. You have these two clubs fighting with each other, and it's really becoming almost like a Hunger Games situation, to the point where they don't even mind anymore. The factions, the conservative right Christians, who just want them to come here legally, despite the fact that the Bible said you will treat the immigrant in your land as a citizen, and he will be treated equally and respected. Now, he didn't subclause that, Christians, with if he has the documentation and the papers and he comes here legally. It wasn't an open-ended discussion. You will treat them as you would treat a native, he said. And that was God's law. Okay, so there's kind of your Christian right, completely ignoring the actual law that they claim to live by and loving your neighbors. Then the far left, who wants to promote a massive government, even more socialist than the right, because both sides are socialist, right? Don't try and tell a Christian right farmer that he can't have his government socialism for his crops. But the socialism for a poor immigrant who's trying to escape a war-ravaged country is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm here saying, wait a minute, no, the socialism is not okay from either side. And so as you look at these comments from both, they're investigating Ron DeSantis for using immigrants. Well, he is using immigrants. What law that's violating would have to be determined. And then you go to Fox News, right? Martha's Vineyard merchant says there's a process. There's a process for coming to America. Follow that. You're right. You're right. There is a process for coming to the United States, not America, because I'm in America, Venezuela's in America, Mexico's in America. So there's a process for coming to the United States. That process is that you walk across. And that is the only legal process. And any process that impedes you walking across is illegal and a violation, not only of human rights, but a violation of the Constitution under the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th Amendments, which I'll explain if you want. I'll even do a whole video on that if you want. But as I'm looking through this, right, and the right is doing one thing and the left is doing another, and they're talking about this Martha's Vineyard and we're making an example. But the only example is that you're using poor people to gain more power and keep us at each other's throats so that the factions keep fighting and don't see your corruption. Because when you take someone who's saying, look, I left my country, it sucks for me, I need something better, and they're like, oh, we'll help you, and they proceed to use you as a political toy to get their constituents to fight like rabid dogs, like you're a ball being kicked around in the Hunger Games. I have a problem with that. And I don't mean to say that I'm on either the left or the right side here. And here's the problem at the end of the day. Let me just lay it out for you and make the answer simple. And we can do a whole video on the legal constitutional ramifications of immigration. But I'll just make it really simple. The government has no legal authority in any capacity to restrict someone from entering, an individual from entering the country. Every person in the world has a right to enter the United States of America according to the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, and all laws. I will contest any argument you think is legitimate right here and now if I can do it quickly and just shut it down. Because you can't find one line in the Constitution that grants the government, particularly the federal government, but the state governments don't have it either because there's a human rights violation involved. But let's talk about the federal government since they're the ones. And so they're saying these immigrants are invading, they're doing huge amounts of damage to the communities. No, your socialism, your government-sponsored drug war, your closed border that's only allowing the most corrupt people in your country, your politicians and your border patrol and your police, to decide who can come across legally, while the poor mother and her daughter, the poor father and his brothers drown in a river trying to come across to do the actual work that you actually need done. But the government, who is literally killing you on the streets if you protest too hard, Lavoy Finicum, Jeff Winehouse, the list goes on, and imprisoning you, Leonard Peltier, you're supporting them to build a wall to lock you into your own country so that only the people that the most corrupt politicians in your country approve of can enter. And then you say, no, the immigration is destroying us. The immigration isn't destroying you at all. You're just that stupid, and you're letting your government through a drug war that isn't about drugs at all, except for the government who wants to make sure they're the ones controlling the flow of drugs, a wall who doesn't actually stop any criminals and only stops normal poor people who actually want to work hard and make a better life for themselves. You're so dumb that while you're protesting the government that's violating you in one hand, and their police and their enforcers and their IRS and their FBI, you're supporting them with the sign in the other hand as you say, build a wall. And if you're that ignorant, you just need to stop talking. You just need to stop talking, baby, and you need to slow down, and you need to crack a book, and you need to study history, and you need to start caring about people. Now, in brief, because someone's going to come in here, as they always do. And they're like, the government can control immigration. The Naturalization Act, the Naturalization Act, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, 1.1, the Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of entries throughout the United States. Uniform law of naturalization, Gavin. The government clearly has authority over immigration, except it doesn't, because that had nothing to do with immigration. In fact, that's not even a matter for debate either. The naturalization clause is about becoming a citizen. And in fact, in this same document, it's defined by the Supreme Court as the act of adopting a foreigner and clothing him with the privileges of a native citizen. So then they'll say, oh, well, that doesn't matter. The Supreme Court's corrupt. Yeah, they are. So just in case, I've been studying that for years too, and no one's wanted to listen because it doesn't fit our faction narrative. But I'm here to throw it out there for you, and I hope that you'll think about it, because here's the copy. I'll throw it up on the screen for you. Here is the copy of the first Naturalization Act, right? So what happened when they ratified the Constitution, then they had the first Congress, and they wrote the subsequent legislation pursuant to the Constitution. So here's the Naturalization Act right here on the screen. It's on the second, well, you got to look close. It's this part right here, okay? That Congress can make the rules, right? They're saying they can define, and the courts can define how to make the rule of naturalization. And it ends on this page. So it's a 2-paragraph thing. It's 2 whole paragraphs. And that was the Naturalization Act. And from that, your federal government continued to grow, particularly after the Civil War, until they started controlling immigration so that they control economics, so that they could control your lives, and eventually all the way up to 2011 and beyond, 2001 and beyond, use the fear of terrorism and violence to progressively, because it wasn't even this way in the 90s when I was young. The farmers didn't care if the immigrants were there illegally. They were good workers, because they didn't know that there was no such thing as an illegal immigrant. So I literally get scoffed at if I say, no, there's no such thing as an illegal immigrant. Immigration restriction is illegal under the Constitution. So the only thing that's illegal here is the politicians. And so the problem is we're saying, oh, there's social programs, there's this or that. Immigrants contribute a huge amount of work and a huge amount of tax revenue to the U.S. Now, taxes are a whole different animal. But the fact is, they contribute a great deal. So this idea that immigrants are coming in and bleeding you dry is another philosophical and political farce that has nothing to do with reality. But then you are again faced with it. How about we stop being socialist? Because despite claiming land of the free and capitalism, the USA is incredibly socialism. So if you're offended by programs being given to the immigrants, I hope you're also cutting them off from the ranchers and their farms. And I hope that you don't think that that allows you to restrict someone's freedom of movement under the Fourth Amendment or anything else, such as having your things taken, having your person absconded, deported, etc., in violation of the Fifth and Sixth Amendment without a jury trial and without due process, or in violation of the Ninth or 10th Amendments by letting the government do things that aren't in the Constitution, or disparaging you of basic human rights, which is, of course, the right to travel, work, and live without papers and without permission, back to the Fourth Amendment. I hope that made sense. And if people really want it, I will do a video talking about the Bill of Rights, because to me, human rights are a natural thing. They're inherent. They come from God. But I still study the Constitution, so I know the codified versions that we use in this time. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I guess the better rule is, can anyone argue this? As you scream to build a wall, which is not only super Berlin-y and fascist and stupid and won't stop any actual significant criminal, and incredibly expensive and incredibly ridiculous in almost every imaginable way, but you think you can control everyone's right to travel because they don't have papers from the government that you run around protesting, insisting that they have no right to demand your papers? Wow, Barbie. Wow. I'm sorry if I've been watching Scrubs too much and it's coming through in my condescending tone, but this does frustrate me. And I want to be hearing all of you. I want us to be opening our minds and hearts and loving our neighbor as ourselves, and to stop letting us be manipulated by left and by right, and start actually caring about people. These are people that are being used as simple political tools so that you and your politicians and your factions can point fingers at each other online. And that's pretty sick and messed up, if you ask me. And I think maybe we need to stop it. But I think if you want to get to the root of it, you have to just say it. There are no illegal immigrants, because all immigration restriction is illegal, not only at a basic human rights level, but under the laws of the United States and the Constitution, which is the highest law of the land. And the government has zero authority to control immigration. Period. The only authority they have, and we're talking about a government who's so far outside the Constitution now that they shouldn't even be allowed to function because they're simply criminals. But even if we assume that the government has legitimate authority, mostly because they have guns and they'll shoot us if we don't obey, they have no legal authority in the Constitution to control immigration in any path whatsoever. I know people, after I close this video, when I can't make a rebuttal, are going to start driveling. The trolls are going to come in, and the loyalists are going to come in, who may not be trying to troll, but they're just well deceived and used by their party. And they're going to come in and say, no, Gavin, that's not what the naturalization clause means. Yes, it is. No, Gavin, it's because of this and this and this and this. No, it isn't. It's because the government wants to keep you controlled and afraid, because if you're afraid and controlled and fighting with each other, you're not going to look at the fact that the real thing you should fear is that you have allowed this government of hypocrisy, lies, and violence that terrorizes the world to exist and call itself a legitimate authority. And that's something we need to think about. So with that, so I don't go too long, I'm going to close off the show for today and let you guys think about the realities of Martha's Vineyard. And yes, it's hypocrisy, but it's hypocrisy from both sides. It's human trafficking from both sides. And the immigrant has a right to enter and live and cross a border whenever they darn well please, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. And the reality is that by allowing a government of criminals to control who comes in, what you're really doing, and allowing your drug war, what you're really doing is you're allowing the people who do want to use you to come in, while restricting the normal, hard-working folk who just want to be your neighbors. And you're not loving them when you do that. All right, you guys, peace, and we'll see you next time.